Now, you guys know I grew up in Florida, and in Florida we have these great little thing called sand spurs. You ever experienced these? You're like walking to the beach, and all of a sudden there's like intense pain in your foot because you've got a sand spur in your foot. Well, me and my brother, if you keep them on your stalk, if you find them and you keep them on the stalk, me and my brother would have sand spur fights, right? So you pull the stalk of sand spurs. It's looks like a medieval mace on top of a green stick, and you just run up behind somebody and you go, bop! It will stick into their back, and sometimes you can even get blood, right? And so, this starts off as a bit of a game, but you know how games go with siblings, right? You kind of throw it soft the first time, and then the next time you throw it a little harder. And then as you're getting them back, you're really trying to dig those sand spurs into their flesh. You want to draw blood. You're getting bigger and bigger stalks. You're getting more and more sand spurs, and you're hitting them with like a whole big clump of sand spurs. This is the way the world invites us to live. This is the way the world invites us to engage with others. If you wrong me, I wrong you back. And in fact, I'm probably going to wrong you more than you wronged me. I want to step it up. I want to take it a little bit further. I want to make sure that you know that you've done something wrong. And Jesus says, I'm not even inviting you to love just your enemies or just your neighbors, just the people who you like. I'm inviting you to love the people who wrong you, who do something that you don't like, who don't agree with you, who vote differently than you, who think differently than you. I'm inviting you to love even them. Them, right? We all have a them. When we try to defend ourselves for the way that we act, the sentence always starts this way. But they, you know who they is now? We're all together. We can figure out who they is in our lives. But they, it might be, but they, my sibling, in our house, but they happens all the time. It generally happens around three distinct issues. Like usually it's around distribution of treats, right? But they got more. Or it's around distribution of where we sit in the car. But they sat there last time. But they, we get the but theys. Or around screen time, specific things that but they said this, but they did this, but they, and we try to justify our reactions to someone else by telling ourselves and everyone around us what they did. But they did this, but they did that, and Jesus upends all of our but theys. See, as soon as we start to but they, as soon as we start to talk about who our enemy is, as soon as we start to define our enemy as anyone who's not for us and getting what we want, having our thing, as soon as we begin to but they, we actually give away our ability to choose the outcome of the situation. We actually give our enemy more power than we have. We actually give them the ability to have a foothold, to have more influence into our lives than they actually should. As soon as we but they are in control. Jesus says there's a way of living that takes all of those but theys, that there's this way of living that moves from just thinking about what they did and responding in kind, this way of escalation that seems to be the way of our world. He says, you've heard it said you should love your neighbors, but I say you should love your enemies. Because in doing so, you upend all of those but theys. In fact, you should go even further than that. You should do good for people that you might not like. You should do good for people who hate you, who talk bad about you. You should bless those who curse you. This is about words. This is about what we say, blessings and curses. Somebody who says bad things about you, you should say, that's understandable. It's understandable. Jesus says that we should say kind words about them, even if they say terrible things about us. And he says that we should pray for those who abuse you. Now, I want to just pause here because that word abuse has certain connotations in our culture. Jesus is not advocating for us to continue in abusive relationships. The real Greek word there talks about the way that we talk about people. It's an insult or something along those lines. But understand, if you're in an abusive situation, that prayer might be unaction, but the action needs to be to get the help that you need to get out of that abusive situation. What Jesus is really saying is that if we bless, if we do good, if we pray for those who we think, who we feel, who we might put in the category of enemy, it has the potential to change us. And even more so, it has the potential to change them. Pastor Ben Kramer says it this way. He says, Christianity should sound like my beliefs continue to deepen my love for others. But more often than not these days, it sounds like the depth of my love for others is contingent on how deeply they conform to the way that I think and believe. Dorothy Day, the Catholic writer, says this, that I really only love God as much as the person that I love the least. Jesus invites us to live in such a way that it takes away all of the but-theys. Dr. Martin Luther King said it this way, talking about this very passage. He said there was a moment in history when the church had influence, when the church made a huge difference. But more often than not, we end up being a thermometer, just reflecting the cultural narrative, the cultural milieu, the way that the world around us invites us to behave, that we look like everybody else, that we behave like everybody else, that we're just a thermometer reflecting what's happening around us. But when the church is at its best, King goes on to say, it's the thermostat of the world. It sets a temperature and says, this is how we're going to live, and the temperature is love. We're going to live in love, and we're going to be the ones that set the temperature. Not the news channel, not our Twitter feed, not all of the people who say, if you don't do this, then that. We're going to set the temperature. That temperature is going to be defined by love. That's what Jesus invites us into, this radical way of living that takes away all the but-theys and turns it into a but God. Because but God can do anything in any moment. But God can change a relationship. But God can bring people back together. But God can do things in people's lives and hearts that we think are too far from God, that they don't understand, that they don't get it, that they don't have it together, that they are the worst. Yet God can do something incredible. And we think this is impossible. We think that we can't do this. We can't do good and bless and pray for our enemies. I don't know if you remember in 2006, there was a shooting in an Amish school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. A gunman walked in and killed 10 young people in this school. And the Amish community got together and they had a prayer meeting. At the end of that prayer meeting, they decided that they would not just forgive. They wouldn't just forgive this gunman, but that they would take on as a responsibility the care of his family that he left behind. They paid for the funeral expenses. They showed up at the funeral for this widow and her young children. And they prayed with them, and they stayed with them. Because that's what love looks like. That's what love invites us to do. Or maybe you prefer what comedian Trevor Noah, what he says about this. He wrote a great book, and he's told some incredible stories about growing up in apartheid South Africa, where people would hurl incredible insults at him because he was black. He said he was walking down the road one day with his mother, whose name was Patricia. He said somebody hurled an insult at us, something incredibly offensive in that culture. He looked at his mom and he said, "Mom, what do we do? How do we respond?" And she said, "Trevor, what we do is we take that insult and we stir it up with the love of Jesus and we send it right back to him." He said, time and time again, as I've experienced difficult things in my life, I've thought, that other person doesn't know who they're dealing with. They're dealing with the son of Patricia. And he said, I constantly think, I'm just going to stir it up with the love of Jesus and send it right back. This kind of love is so radical that this kind of love changes the way that people live and engage, that this kind of love has the potential of reconciliation and building bridges and bringing people back together. It has the potential for the church to hold a unique place in a divided culture that says we're going to lead with love. No matter where you're at, no matter what you think, no matter what you think about us, we're going to lead with love. Because that's what Jesus invites us to do. And you may say terrible things about us, and you may be really mean to us, and you may talk bad about us on Twitter and Facebook and all the other things on the internet, and you can do whatever you want to do, but we're going to lead with love.